Hi guys, how are you? I hope you are fine at your place. So today we are going to start with our book, Hornbill's first chapter, The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khushwant Singh. The Portrait of a Lady is a real story of the writer's grandmother. The name of the writer is, as usually I have told you, that Khushwant Singh. He tells us the story of his childhood that he had spent with his grandmother. The summary of this chapter will brief you about the life of writer with his grandmother. All the beautiful and emotional moments are present in this summary, in this chapter. The summary will tell you about the beautiful relationship that writer had with his grandmother. So here we start with the summary of the chapter. The author talks about his grandmother. He had known her for the past 20 years and she had always been old and wrinkled. He was told that she was once young and pretty and had a husband. His grandfather's portrait hung on the wall, in which he wore loose fitted clothes, a turban, and had a long white colored beard that reached his chest. He also appeared very old, and the author thought that he was someone who could have many grandchildren but not a wife or children. The author could never imagine that once his grandmother was young and pretty. His grandmother was short, fat, slightly bent in posture, and her face had a lots of wrinkles. She seemed so old that she had been the same for the past 20 years. According to author, she was a beautiful but not pretty. She walked around the house in an awkward way, wearing spotless white clothes with beads of rosary hanging from one hand and other hand rested on her back for support. She had silver colored hair which was not neatly combed and was disorganized. She was constantly chanting prayer. The author lived with her in the village. They were good friends. His parents left him with her to settle in the city. The author's grandmother used to wake him up every morning and get him ready for school. She would recite her morning prayer while she bathed and dressed him up, and he loved her voice but would not try to memorize it, a word of what she spoke. She would make his things ready like wooden slate, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, and he would eat thick steel chapatis with butter and sugar spread on it. They both used to walk to school, and his grandmother carried steel chapatis with her to feed the village dogs. Author's grandmother would accompany him to the school as the temple was attached to the school and she used to visit the temple daily. The village dog met them at the village door. They would follow them to their home, growling and fighting with each other for the stale chapatis that she fed them. When his parents got settled in city, they called them, and that was the turning point of his friendship with his mother. They shared the same room but no longer would give him company to his school. He started going to an English medium school and a motor bus would come to pick and drop him. There were no dogs in street whom she could feed and she did the village as she did in the village. So she started feeding sparrows in veranda of their house. As the year passed in the city, their interaction reduced. For some time, she continued to wake him up and would get him ready for the school, should ask him what he had learned in the school that day. As she did not know the language, she could not help him with the lessons. As his new school never taught him about God and religious scriptures, this made her very sad, and she did not approve such an education. As the author went to university, he had a room of his own, and the common link of his friendship with his grandmother they had when they shared the same room that was changed now, and thus his friendship with her ended. Now she became more private and spent her whole day spinning wheel, and from sunrise to sunset she would sit and silently recite her prayer. And in afternoon she used to feed sparrows in the veranda, breaking the bread into small pieces, and she would feed hundreds of the birds. The bird would gather around her. Some sat near her, some on her legs, some on her shoulder, and few on her head. And she never showed them, but always smiled. I think that was the happiest moment at that time during the whole day. When the author decided to go abroad for further studies, he believed it would be the last time he would see her, as he would be gone for 5 long years. All they reached the station, she held him tightly and kissed for her forehead. He thought it was the last physical contact with her. But when the author came back after 5 years, she came to meet him at the station. She looked just the way she did 5 years ago, not a day older. She held him again in her arm and was still reciting her prayer. In evening, she didn't follow her regular routine of praying. She collected a few women from neighborhood, got a drum and started singing with them. She thumped the ruined part of the drum and sang along. The whole family persuaded her to stop as she might get ill due to Exhaustion. The next morning, she fell ill. It was a mild fever. The doctors told them that it would go away, but she took it differently. According to her, she would die soon as her end was near. She started chanting prayers as she didn't want to waste her last hour in talking to anyone. The family protested, tried to stop her, but she lay peacefully on her bed, chanting prayers and doing her beads. Suddenly she stopped and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. A calm, pale appearance spread on her face, and she was dead. The family lifted her from the bed, laid her on the ground, and wrapped her with a red colored shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat silently near her. The author's mother fetched some bread for the birds, but they didn't eat any. They flew away, and later the family carried the dead body. The sweeper removed the crumbs the next morning. The birds were so sensitive. They did not want to eat bread but were mourning the death of the one who had fed them for so many days. Thank you. That's